And now it's my distinct pleasure to bring up Mandar Apte, GameChanger from Shell, and Peter Schwartz, SVP at Salesforce and formerly with Shell. So please come up and look forward to a great discussion about inner power.
How is everyone? Only good or super good? So I'm going to introduce myself and what I do and build a story and then ask the master here to add to the story. And afterwards, we'll have a dialogue, and then we'll open the floor to any questions. So I hope that this story is very unshell. I hope that's the end goal, is to share that Shell is a very human company where people like you and me work. So in my 14 years at Shell, I have not met a single evil person yet. So by training, I'm a chemical engineer. I'm from India. I'm from Bombay. I came to the US about 17 years ago for my graduate studies. I came to a town called Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was a reverse culture shock. Then I came to Houston to work for Shell. And over the years, I have done many technical roles, but I have also started a few employee networks, employee initiatives. One such initiative is what I'm going to share. It's called Empower. And it's based on the fact that with responsibility comes power. So what is responsibility? It's the ability to respond. So if I can have the next slide. I work in a practice called GameChanger, which sounds very cool, but it's a well-kept secret. Not many people inside Shell perhaps even know what this program does, how this program works. It's a place where ideas can begin. So any radical idea is like a ghost. People don't know what it is about. GameChanger provides a safe place where that idea can have a play area. So you use the Silicon Valley mindset of portfolio, venture capital, and you create this space inside a big multinational where these ideas / crazy people with ideas can thrive, can get a shoulder. So when I joined the practice, I started asking these two questions. Let's assume that everybody is innovative and creative. So how can we enhance our creativity? What can I do to learn how to enhance my creativity? For that, I need to know what are my personal blockers to creativity. Does it make sense? Once I know my blocker, then I can see what I can do, right? Next slide. So over the last 4 years, I have interviewed about 2,000 Shell people. And this is a framework that I have made because based on the life that I have outside of Shell, where I teach meditation programs. As a volunteer, I teach meditation practice. You can say we have 4 faculties, inner faculties. The first is our mind. Nobody has seen the mind, but it vacillates. It goes in the past, it goes in the future. So for me, when my mind is stressed, under tension, under fear, under anxiety, I don't get any innovative, creative solutions. So I need to learn how I can have more self-awareness, more presence, more calm, more happiness. The second observation I make is with the second layer, which is, you can say, our intellect that keeps judging. If I'm judgmental based on the bias that I have or the inhibitions that I have, I cannot accept something new that doesn't fit in my box. So I need to learn how to be non-judgmental. You can even say allow imperfections, because a novel idea in the beginning need not be perfect. The third faculty is our memory, and it's a very interesting faculty because it tends to remember failure, tends to remember negative things more than it remembers positive things. For example, at the end of the year when we all go for our year-end reviews, we go very happy with what we have achieved. But you know what the boss remembers? the one insignificant failure, mistake that we have done. Has it happened to some of you? Yeah, it happens at home. So if I remember failure, then I'm taking the permission away from myself to take risk. Because today HR doesn't come to you and say, hey Mandar, you failed, here is the bonus. Right? So if I want to empower myself, I need to learn how to forget that failure. At the same time, learn from the mistakes, so not repeat the same mistakes. Would you agree? Yes? And the last faculty you can say is the ego, human ego, which all of us in the room, especially people who are engineers, we are trained to say, I know it all. That state of mind cannot have the innovative power. So we need to learn how I can learn from everyone. Does it make sense so far? You can say this is the new leadership paradigm. If I can handle my 4 faculties, inner faculties, my mind, intellect, memory, and ego, I can be more innovative than I am today. I can be a better leader than I am today. The second framework that we made through this Empower initiative is creating various roles for innovation. So innovation only begins with an idea, but you need many other roles. You need a cheerleader. You need somebody who gives constructive criticism. You need somebody with a network. You need somebody who's the glue between 2 networks. Finally, the most important role is somebody who believes that this person is worth investing in. Let me try this idea in my place. Right? So you need somebody who deploys, who takes risks in you. So this is my last slide. Based on my meditation practice, my manager asked me when I got hired into this practice, is radical innovation is all about mindset. So why don't you create a program that uses meditation science, and the wrapper on this chocolate is innovation theory. So it's a good chocolate to have. So I went and interviewed my meditation teacher. His name is Sri Ravi Shankar. He's the founder of a very large non-profit organization called the International Association for Human Values. And within 5 minutes, he gave me a talk, and I converted that into this slide. So you can say it's the mechanics of how innovation comes about. It consists of 3 cogwheels. The first is access to new information. So if a chemical engineer like me only meets other chemical engineers, you can say I have very little access to new information, right? So I need to learn how I can hang out with a cancer surgeon, how I can talk to a biologist. For that, I need to have good people skills, I need to build trust, and I need to have a mind that is more open to new ideas, new suggestions. Make sense so far? Yeah? Second cogwheel is even more important. It's called interest in that subject, energy, passion, inspiration. For example, I need not be a mechanical engineer, but if my passion is to bring solar energy in the villages in Africa, I can make that happen because I'm interested in that. And the third cogwheel is even bigger than the first 2, is the intuitive power. Because today we have lots of information, maybe perhaps lots of energy, but which idea am I going to put my time on? Because I'm time constrained, bandwidth constrained, right? So that is where you can say I need to develop my intuitive power, the gut feeling. And the premise, the hypothesis of this is silence, as we all know, is the mother of creativity. So few moments of silence, does it empower me to not only get rid of my negative emotions, but also bring me the skills to enhance my creative power? So that's the framework we have used over the last 2 years, Peter, since you have left. And we have used this program grassroots, so bottom up, not top down. And we have reached to about 2,000 employees in more than 10 countries. So people meditate during lunch hour. I get emails almost every day in my inbox from Shell employees in Brunei, in Gabon, inquiring about the program. So I would like to know your views on this framework, and if you agree, disagree, if you have any thoughts to add, build on.
Delighted. First of all, let me say hello, and delighted to be here, and delighted to be here with Mandar. What I'll do is build a little bit on what Mandar had to say and actually reflect on my own career in this respect. But let me begin with a line, which I wonder how many of you are old enough to remember. Don't fold, spindle, or mutilate. How many of you remember? Yes? About 15% of the audience are gray enough to remember what that means. That was a line on a punch card. And for those of you who don't remember, a punch card was a device for entering information into a big machine we used to call a computer. My first computer was an IBM System 360, about the size of this room. And of course, it was a useful tool, but in a cultural sense, it was seen as, in some sense, a massive tool for control, at the extreme, even repression. All the fantasies of the future were of a computer-dominated civilization, of machines that would run our lives, and the symbol of that was this card that said if somehow you folded or spindled or mutilated it, you had done something terribly wrong. I began my life in California at Stanford Research Institute in 1972. And about that time, a guy named Doug Engelbart and someone I would become very close friends with, Stuart Brand, were rethinking what that machine meant. And a few other guys like Bob Kahn and others at SRI and UCLA were beginning to lay out the architecture of something called the Internet. And Stuart wrote a book in 1974 called Two Cybernetic Frontiers, in which he wrote about something that he thought was going to be very important, something called a personal computer. Now, it also happened in this community of people that they were doing many other things besides building machines. They were taking drugs, they were meditating, they were exploring Buddhism in its many different forms, because what they saw was, in fact, on the one hand, that there was a remarkable new capability beginning to unfold in the world that was going to give people what Doug Engelbart was called augmented abilities, human augmentation, and new networks of connection to enable people to connect with each other in new ways. But it wasn't simply about playing games, which it was as well. That's what we did with the ARPANET at the beginning. We played games with MIT. We didn't share profound intellectual ideas. But what we were really about was human connection. And the idea that, in fact, that connection and the wellspring of ideas that was being born in what would come to be called Silicon Valley, it wasn't yet Silicon Valley. In fact, when I moved to Palo Alto, the big issue was unemployed aerospace engineers, of which I was one. The only point is that there was a marriage between the idea that we were developing ourselves as human beings and that involved an inner life, and the elaboration of the networks that would ultimately become what we now experience, first of all, as the Internet, and now the world of hyperconnectivity. And that's the arc I want to travel in a moment, because there is a constant parallel between these two arcs. When I was at SRI, I got to know someone at Shell, whose name was Pierre Vac. And Pierre was the person who actually began what was called scenario planning. But Pierre had been a student of Gurdjieff during World War II, and had actually lived with a lady named Madame Blavatsky, who, and so all told in various stories. But what he recognized was that if you wanted to make better decisions about the future, it wasn't enough to have good predictions. That was insufficient. People could ignore those. It was a function of getting to the inner mind, the mental map of the decision maker. The test of good scenarios wasn't, did you predict the future right? The test was, did anybody do the right thing? Wow. An accurate scenario that everybody ignored was not a success, and I learned that as a consultant painfully later on. It does not help to tell your CEO, I told you so. It is the case that what Pierre recognized was that the real test of good thinking about the future was that it touched the inner mind, the inner soul, the inner heart, the emotional intelligence as much as the intellectual intelligence of the individual. Move on to my time in Shell itself. There it became very clear that if you wanted to, in fact, organize on a global scale and actually have a degree of autonomy, you could not have simple hierarchical control of the sort that most organizations had built following World War II. It really required a very different kind of, again, person to lead and manage. And there they had a set of criteria for choosing the leadership of the company, many of which were things that are quite familiar: analysis, realism, but they also had imagination. That is, you had to imagine other possibilities. And most of all, a capacity they called helicopter. And helicopter was the ability to get above a situation and see it in its totality, as well as to zoom in on the relevant detail. That is, if you were just a big picture person, they didn't trust you to make good decisions. If you were just a detail person, then you were just going to make banal decisions, unimaginative, pedestrian, and so on. And the criteria that separated those who really got to the top from those who didn't was the capacity of their helicopter. And that, again, was a statement of the inner mind, inner person. Could you grasp the totality of what you had to deal with in such a way that you could make imaginative, thoughtful, but yet realistic decisions about the future? One step forward. With Stewart and a philosopher by the name of Jay Ogilvy, who wrote a book called Many-Dimensional Man. Avery knows Jay and Stewart very well. We created a company called Global Business Network, of which Avery was a part of our community. But what it was really about was just that, a community. And what we quickly learned was, again, it was a function of emotional intelligence and that capacity to have shared values and sense of purpose. That community persisted for 25 years, but what we also learned in that was what the value of diversity was. That if you were really going to be creative, you had to bring that enormous diversity of remarkable creative souls together to create new ideas. And again, that drew way back. Pierre had the notion of going back to Gurdjieff in meetings of remarkable men. Today we would say people, but that was in the 1930s when he wrote that, I think. Meetings with remarkable men. We created a network of remarkable people whose function was to create that sense of diversity and rich perspective. A couple of years ago, I joined another local company called Salesforce.com. And tonight, the Churchill Club will honor our CEO, Mark Benioff. And one of the reasons is that Salesforce is really quite a unique company. And again reflects, I think, the kind of values that you are espousing here, Mandar, and the kind of framework that you are articulating. When Mark started the company, everything good, by the way, about Salesforce, I can take no credit for. I'm a new guy. All my colleagues and CEO and so on are the ones who created what I'm about to describe, but highly consequential. When Mark began the company, he wanted to create a new kind of philanthropic engine and instituted what we call the 1% rule, which is basically 1% of the time, 1% of the product, 1% of the equity is subject to philanthropy. All of us employees are required to work 6 days a year, some volunteer activity at company expense, our choice, but where we are seen to be engaged in something broader. They match our contributions, we give away a lot of money, all the NGOs can use our product for free. It is a very successful economic engine, and it is a very successful philanthropic engine. And I want to mention that and come back to, and one other thing, and then I'll stop. The philanthropy is important, but it's also, in some sense, a selection criteria. There are people, and I suspect there may be people in this room who feel it is not the function of business to engage in these kinds of things. This, business is about business, and we make stuff and do stuff and make money for our shareholders, and we deliver value to our customers. But this philanthropy stuff, it's for foundations and NGOs and things like that. Well, not at Salesforce. So if you think it's not for the world of business, you leave. And if you think it's stupid, it's a waste of time. And if, on the other hand, you think this is really worth doing, it's a source of passion, commitment, deep sense of value and purpose that drives people's engagement in Salesforce to even higher performance for our shareholders and our customers and so on. It becomes a very powerful motivator, the opportunity to fulfill those values that arise from within, to act in ways that most companies can't, and have those be part of the same sense of identity. It isn't, oh, over here I'm a good guy and over here I'm doing business. It doesn't work that. You are the same person. Your identity is who you are, and it is the same in both contexts. And Salesforce enables that. And then finally, Mark articulated a management tool that enables us to achieve a high level of coherence without a lot of hierarchical control. And it's something he invented when he was at Oracle and brought to Salesforce, and we call it the V2 MOM: vision, values, methods, obstacles, and metrics. And the idea is we as an organization, I won't go into the elaborate process, both as a group and as individuals, as part of our process of planning for the next year, articulate what we think is the kind of vision we're trying to achieve, what are the values that are required to achieve that, what are the methods used to achieve that, what are the obstacles to preventing that, and how would we know if it's successful, what are the metrics. And we publish that, and everybody shares it, and we, in fact, talk about it together. So mine is on our internal collaborative network, and everybody can comment on it. Yesterday, a recent person joined the group, and we were talking, what's her V2 MOM, and where do we fit, and how do we collaborate, and so on. And that requires both an external sense, methods, obstacles, metrics, and an inner sense, vision and values, all brought together. And it enables us as an organization to move unbelievably fast. I've never seen an organization move as fast as Salesforce, and be relatively coherent. So all I'm trying to suggest is through that whole arc, what we see is this interplay of the inner mind, the inner heart, the values, the state of being, and the kind of external world of the networks that now in the manifest form of hyperconnectivity connect people, enable them to express those and connect with each other in ways that we never have before. So what was only imagined when the internet was born is now actually being achieved. In this world of Facebook, Twitter, et al., we are connected at a scale that we've never been connected before. And it enables that vision and values to be realized in ways that harken back to 40 years ago, now actually being manifest in the networks that we're all part of. That's it.
I have a few things to add and bolt on to what you're saying. So internet is important, but inner net is also very important. The second thing is this concept of shared value innovation, which we spoke yesterday. It's doing good for society and doing good for the business is possible. So we have recently done some experiments on expanding the scope of this GameChanger program to see if there are any radical innovations in that nexus between good for society and good for Shell or the business or the industry as well. And I think that's where I go back from here with the tagline of this conference, igniting conversations. Because in that shared value space, it's, you can say, a non-competitive space. It's like Google circles. In one circle, you can have Shell, World Bank, and Salesforce attack a social problem, environmental problem. In some other circle, it could be some other institution or a joint institution. So what I leave here, maybe a seed, is if there are any ideas here in the Bay Area that are radical, that need proof of concept help, that enhance the value for society and business both, then GameChanger program is ready to invest in such ideas and create that proof of concept in the fastest route to failure. That jargon I'll leave with, because that for me in the last 4 years was the most profound insight. Had I had this insight when I started, what does it mean, fastest route to failure? For me, it's very similar to the American dating system. Right? You would like to know whether this person is good for you within a few Starbucks meetings, within a few weekend movies, not 20 years from now saying, oh my God, what did I do? Right? So fastest route to failure is challenging yourself to take the highest risk earlier rather than later. Right? And investing in that person or that idea that is high value yet high risk. So it's like options, like the whole venture capital Silicon Valley mindset. So it's been great and honor to talk to you, and I have those papers from Napier, peer WAC papers. They are very inspirational. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.